Hey everyone, welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. For once, I am not recording this intro at 1 in the morning. It is actually 11 in the morning. And Naomi and I are going on a short vacation to Solvang, which is a little Dutch town in California. I know nothing else about it except that it is not Los Angeles, and so it will be wonderful. All right. Hey, speaking of Los Angeles, today's episode is Red Kross, a band from just outside Los Angeles. If you don't know who Red Kross is, or specifically Jeff and Steve McDonald, the brothers behind Red Kross, let me give you their bio. Originally from Hawthorne, California, brothers Jeff and Steve McDonald started playing music together in 1978 in a band called The Tourists, while both were in middle school. A few years later, they changed the name to Red Kross, spelled correctly, and then eventually Red Kross, spelled Reddkross, and since then have released 7 albums and a number of EPs. In addition to Red Kross, the brothers perform in a number of other groups, including Z Malibu Kids with Anna Waronker, who is both Steve's wife and the lead singer of That Dog, and a former guest on Beginnings. And also, Steve himself is a member of the Melvins. I mean, come on. This episode is full of rock and roll royalty. Red Kross's most recent album, Beyond the Door, was released at the end of August this year on Merge. And let me tell you, folks, it's great. I mean, come on. Red Kross is great. Merge, one of my favorite labels. You're in for a treat today. We talk all about their upbringing in Hawthorne. Hawthorne is a strange place, I'll say that. And we get into why it's strange. It's where the Beach Boys are from. So we talk about that and a bunch of other things. This is exciting for me. I've liked Red Kross. I first heard them when I was in college. I remember discovering them. And so this was exciting to talk to Jeff and Steve, who are both very nice dudes. By the way, if this is your first time listening to Beginnings, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you'd like to listen to more episodes, you can get them all on Spotify or download them at beginnings.libsyn.com. You can get the last 100 on whatever your podcast app is. And I what I usually do here is make some recommendations. You know, some Netflix. If you like this, you might like this. Recommended if you like, RIYL. I should just call it that. So if you are a fan of indie rock, you're here for them. You might like the fact that I've talked to Carl Newman or Scott Camberg from Pavement, Kurt Heasley of the Lilies, David Grubbs from Gaster del Sol, and many other things. Like I said before, Anna Waronker from That Dog, whose new album is coming out soon. Sadie Dupuy of Speedy Ortiz. Colin Newman from Wire. That was a great one. Anyone else? Anara George, another daughter of Los Angeles. And tons of other people. In fact, if you want to subscribe to the show, you can do it on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or Spotify or Google Play, probably a bunch of other places. And you can follow me on social media at Andy Beckerman on both Instagram and Twitter. Twitter, if you like dumb jokes. Instagram, if you like pictures of dogs and cats that we own. And I think that's about it. I have some great episodes coming up, so I hope you subscribe. Patrick Stickles from Titus Andronicus. I just talked to him yesterday. It was super, super cool. He's a really interesting dude. Magdalene Visaggio, wonderful comics writer. She was really great. Vagabond. I think that's next week, Vagabond. She was so cool. I love her music. So stay tuned for some great episodes. But for now, let's talk to Jeff and Steve. Oh, because I usually don't have two people on the show. Do you want to introduce yourselves so people
sure.
know your voices?
Yes, I'm Jeff McDonald.
And I'm Steve McDonald.
And I did a little bit of research. I don't like to do too much so I can be surprised. But A couple things I found out. You guys are from Hawthorne.
Hawthorne, California. Yes.
That's where you grew up?
Yep.
Yes.
And two facts I found out about Hawthorne that piqued my interest were that up through the early part of last century is a whites-only town.
Oh, I believe that.
Not
when we
surprised to hear
lived
that.
there, but I think Hawthorne goes back to the teens. The early 20th century. It was a farming town.
But you're saying that it was part of you mean was that an official
Like a restricted neighborhood.
Yeah.
Was that an official or is that like sort of an unofficial doctrine that was acknowledged? Because the only reason I ask is because I know Larry Mantle, I think on NPR was talking recently about Baldwin Hills. And he grew up in Baldwin Hills in the 60s. And he was saying that there was some these covenants between developers and real estate owners. And it had become illegal, in the early teens or something, for them to actually make officially a white-only area, but that people continued to respect this. They call it a covenant, as they thought it was their moral duty.
Yeah,
to
all of
respect
Southern
it.
California was basically laid out in those ways across racial boundaries. I mean, even I guess the Firestone Tire Company was amongst the first to employ a mass amount of African Americans, and they would carve out the neighborhoods around that, and
where the workers would live.
So we in the neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods that we grew up in were once built in post-war around the kind of aerospace industry. So these were these little kind of mini utopia track house communities.
For white people.
For white people, because the white people worked there. And yeah, I mean, it started becoming integrated by the time we were small children, and but yeah, there's always that kind of residue left over. But
Yeah, well, because
we had the Inglewood, which was African American. We had a section of Hawthorne, which was a neighborhood called Lenox, and that was Hispanic. And that's the way it all kind of turned. So yeah, I mean,
I would definitely say that I felt growing up, we were in an area that was in transition, and it wasn't a comfortable one.
Yeah.
Racially speaking, and I think about it a lot nowadays. Yeah, I mean, because when Jeff's first years with my parents were in Inglewood, and when I was born, I was actually taken back to the apartment in Inglewood, and then we moved to Hawthorne when I was 2, and Inglewood became entirely, pretty much predominantly African American by the early 70s or late 60s, and so my parents are part of that transition, and they call there's these migrations and exoduses of races, and so yeah, growing up in the neighborhood that we were in, it was predominantly white. The elementary schools that I went to were predominantly white, but they were starting to bus around that time, and there was a lot of tension, and there was a lot of people would want to know what side of the 405 freeway you lived on, or were you south of 120th, and we went to public school, and the 3 elementary schools in our area all joined together for middle school, and there was a class distinction, and that was even just between white kids. There was a class distinction depending on what school you went to, and we kind of went to the wrong side of the track school. And then further east in Hawthorne, it was way more integrated throughout that time already by the time we were in elementary school. So high school was pretty integrated, and I remember there were kind of race riots when I was in high school. There were moments where there were floods of kids running down corridors going crazy, and it was called a riot, and it was racially it was started over groups of kids were not playing well together.
Talking crap about
talking smack to each other, and one group was African American, another one was Caucasian, and then there was
a Hispanic.
A lot of Hispanic
But those
kids
were
too.
this is 5 minutes before guns.
I mean, before guns
before
existed.
guns, everyone had a gun in their
Before
pocket.
yeah,
because I remember when they would have these kind of like riots. These like I wouldn't even call them riots. These kind of skirmishes. They would be the old-fashioned, old-timey. Like the worst would be like someone would have chains.
Yeah.
It would seem like. But like
like a greaser fight.
Yeah, I was just like the movie Grease or yeah. But then it just in mid '80s, it's like crack cocaine, gang wars, guns, all that stuff. This was still just overnight. That kind of stuff just started changing.
Well, also something that I would think about when on the racial topic is that when I was in elementary school is when they ran the TV miniseries Roots was on TV. And now, I've thought about that a lot lately. Like the reason I think about this, I'm father, I have a 10-year-old son. And he goes to a very liberal, progressive school that is constantly thinking about these issues. Mm-hmm. And so, which is I'm grateful for, but they've almost gone too far, in my opinion, to an extreme, like where my kid is really into NBA, really into rap music, which is stuff I was never into. It was funny because Jeff's 6'6", I'm 6'3". We never played basketball. I mean, I regret it now, but anyways, my 10-year-old turned me on to this stuff, and he started to wanting to wear his hair in braids, like cornrows. Yeah. He wears cornrows. He's into it, but at his
emulate his idols, which is so innocent.
To emulate his idols, he was not thinking twice.
What we all do.
Yeah, which is like what we all do, and I felt of that. It's like sort of like, oh, great, I mean, like I feel like I grew up in a racially tense environment and an intense time as well. So, although I think I was always open-minded and tried my best to not be typical on that level, I was still affected. I was hung up by these things, by these migrations that had happened to the prior generation, had left residue for my generation of fear and just an otherness, not awkwardness. And so when my son is just naturally gravitating towards things that are predominantly African-American, I feel like fucking awesome. Like it means he's not hung up. He's not hung up. He's not thinking about it. He's neither devaluing it or overvaluing it. It's just something he likes. But at his school, it was an issue that he wanted to wear cornrows. And we were told that it would be cultural appropriation for him to wear cornrows. And I just thought and they wanted to talk to him about it. And I just remember being like, no, you're not talking to him about it, because I think that what he's doing is really awesome. I think it's coming from a really pure, unaffected place. And isn't that the goal? And that's what I thought. I mean, maybe I'm missing the point. Maybe there's something, and one of your listeners can straighten it out for me in the comments section. But I wouldn't let them talk. And they tried to tell me, they said, well, it's a very complicated topic, and we really would like to talk to him about these things. And I said, yeah, it is a really complicated topic. And that's why it's all the more important that your message is not convoluted. And yours feels really convoluted because it's just all this is a kid emulating his heroes, and he's not seeing the difference in skin color, and he's not hung up. And in my opinion, it seems like you're trying to custom, order him a hang up about this. You're trying to make him think about it in ways that I don't think he needs to. So, it's weird. But anyway, so all that, it's a long digression, but point is, I have thought about this a lot, about my childhood.
But the way, because of the extreme race relations in the 70s in Hawthorne, you think that it has, how has that affected you?
I was afraid. Are you
talking about affecting us on a creative level?
Just I'm interested. So, I asked
you about humans right now, but it was a segue into creativity, maybe.
I do think that stuff comes out of. So, the theory behind the show is that we talk about your childhood and the way that you were raised, and that explains in some way. Because I'm also curious about you're in the punk scene of the late 70s, early 80s in Los Angeles, which to me was handed. I learned about it. It's mythology to me in some way, right? I read Get in the Van, and I'm like, well, I guess I kind of know Henry Rollins
No, I think
version.
it makes you an expert now.
Yeah. That's what I was getting to. Was that I am. I should be granted an honorary degree.
I should read it myself someday.
For me, there was like with punk rock and when we started playing music, it was it had nothing to do with race relations because it was just everybody hated me because I was different, and that was pre-all. I mean, had nothing to do with race or with racial tensions in Hawthorne. It was complete. You were doing something that would be, several years before your general public knew about, and kids just like to screw with other kids.
I mean, the racial thing is a sort of a sidebar. There's always there's always the structure. There was always that struggle of, I mean, for us, we're just like fitting. And for me in Hawthorne High, it was like the black kids. It was easy for me because at least I wasn't expected to try to fit into that group. The real struggle for me was fitting in with my peer group. That the white kids they were the ones that were more interested in like, what does that button mean that you're wearing?
Yeah,
what does
everything
that shirt
means something, and it was just like people don't really like my child. People don't realize that to have like crazy colored hair in 1978 was the equivalent to walking down the street nude. I mean, it literally would bring people nude. The word nude. It would literally. People would just look at you like you were from another planet, just completely, not like. It just was out, and it was so there was always this anxiety around it, like the teenager who wants to rebel, and like I'm a punk, I'm not gonna, I could easily go back to looking normal, but I would never do that. It was like that kind of anxiety. Was like a super high tension version of normal teen anxiety.
But now the thing that's interesting about that is that you elected to make yourself a social outcast.
Yeah, but I can go back to being a kid. You think that, there's no other, this is who I am.
I mean,
you
just as we started this conversation on the topic of race, I think it's interesting because, like, if a black kid had walked down certain neighborhoods in Hawthorne, would have got a very similar reaction, but they didn't elect that.
I know that, but when you're a kid, it's like no one's going to tell Caitlyn Jenner that she elected to be trans. It's like when
I know people that would.
Well, I don't associate with those types. But anyway, when you're a kid, you have that kind of conviction. So it was for us. It was like we had. It was very cool to find about 10 other people in our neighborhood that in the pre-punk, the pre-mainstream. Era of punk rock. It was, I don't even know that you could be that freaky in today's kids.
I mean, like, what would you have to do?
Yeah, what would you have? You would have to walk down the street naked and to get that kind of response.
Well, I mean, the thing is, reactions of any kind nowadays are like, I just heard on another podcast recently that stuck with me. It's Conan O'Brien and Mark Maron, I think, and they were talking about, or it was Conan O'Brien talking, I forget whose podcast, but talking about in the current state of popular culture, with all the noise that's going on constantly, all of us being like completely bombarded, that the only thing that really sticks out is strong opinions. And so there's either strong opinions and they can be really, and they can be really hateful. And then what was the other thing? I forget what the other thing was. But the point is that on the topic of how you can get attention nowadays, it's hard to know, and that people are doing more and more extreme things to do that. And one of the ways is they troll the internet and say really cruel, horrible things to anonymous people.
It's you just have to be the needle that's poking out of the haystack in order to be seen, regardless of what your opinion is. I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah.
So Reddit alt-right culture is the new punk.
Well,
I don't mean that was 100%
but I think if you're going to be
the
punk, you have to put it on the streets, or it doesn't count.
Right. But so I mean, what gave you that when you were younger? What gave you that conviction?
Rock and roll. I mean, it's I guess it's the ultimate form of rebellion to actually just love music and not really know why it's connecting with you on such a deep level, but it's a kind of a way out of the status quo or what all the other kids were into. And so it just gave purpose, for me it did as a kid. It was, wow, I can be in a band and I don't have to fit in with these people. Screw these people. And find other like-minded others. I didn't think of myself as a creative person, and then around that time I realized, oh yeah, that's what it's all about. You have to make this stuff up yourself, and just kind of find it.
I mean, do you know where that started, that kind of, I don't know about quest, but let's say journey to differentiate yourself? Because I was similar. I wanted to, I don't know what it was. I mean, like, I can try to come up with some ideas of, like, I listened to Weird Al when I was a kid. I was Jewish in a really Christian area. There's like a bunch of like different things like that. Do you know if there were things like that for you?
Probably.
Well, your taste in music was very different.
Taste in music was really strange. I mean, when we would, I grew up on Beatles and Rolling Stones when I was a very small kid. And so when someone like David Bowie came out, for instance, everyone knows David Bowie, but David Bowie was a really outsider artist in America years and years before he was ever a mainstream artist. So to buy a record like Hunky Dory or Ziggy Stardust in a record store that was basically run by the hippies left over from the 60s, they just looked at it. They thought of it as like as pornography, essentially. I mean, really square kind of attitudes towards the next generation of things to come after them. So as a kid, it was, I guess there's a certain, makes it the forbidden fruit aspect of it, but you can really get into this kind of music. You knew it was so rare, and you wouldn't hear it on the radio. You wouldn't see it, on television, except for on a very rare occasion. So that just kind of, I don't know, being exposed to those kind of artistic artists at a young age. Like, I never thought I could play music when I was 10 years old, but later on when the Ramones came, but people forget the Ramones came out in 1976, 70. So it was before the Sex Pistols. And for us, we saw them on the late night rock and roll show, Don Kirshner's. That's how the Ramones were delivered. So then, you just have rock press. Then you start realizing, wow, maybe I can do what they do.
But now this is interesting to me because I've always kind of wondered, because Jeff was the one bringing home this stuff. And I was ridiculously young, but he was really young too. I mean, when he was 11, I was 8 or 7. But, and I was, eating up this stuff, but it's like, where did an 11-year-old get the idea to bring home Hunky Dory, and why did it not turn, like, was there anything about the fact that you were judged for it by the older generation that turned you off at all?
No, it's just that find this magic. It's like there was there was David Bowie, then you would find there was like 2 rock magazines that you can actually find. You'd learn about Mott the Hoople, you'd learn about Mark Bolan, and then you just learn about all the origins of all that strange music. And most of the first generation punk rock people, that's their same story. They're the first we were the children of the first generation, which means that we kind of straddle like pre-hardcore, but we're the first hardcore generation were our age peer groups. The first punk rockers would have been my older brothers. So we're in a strange. I mean, I always equate this
5 to 10 years older than us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of a lost generation person because I was born at the last official year of the baby boom, but. My parents are baby boomers. It's like, you're in this lost generation. So we were little kids when the people who are 10 years older were the first ones locally to play like this kind of New York English art, school type music. And so we got to be the little kids to hang around, but we had to, we had the goods. We figured out how to play our guitars and how to write and how to perform because, we were fans. It's like filmmakers, like the true fans of film are the ones that make the most interesting movies. I mean, that's like a Martin Scorsese or a Quentin Tarantino type. Those people are intense fans, and you see it on the screen. That's exactly the way we approach music.
I wonder how much if your first experiences of music are like the Beatles and Also, some of that, my parents, had all these Beatles records, and that's some of my first. There's this palatable, like harmonies and melody, very beautiful melodies and stuff like that. But there's also like this like slow move towards weirdness in their music as they go on. I wonder how much like that's the entryway for a lot of people into like, for you, like Bowie, or for me, it was like, Pavement or something like that.
Right.
But you mean the Beatles? Well, the Beatles are a total gateway drug for generation after
For
generation.
everyone.
They continue to do that.
I mean, even
this
the
movie
Velvet
that
Underground were Beatles fanatics.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's, they're sort of like, the holy grail of like, they kind of open the Pandora's box to like any weird kind of working class kid to become an artist,
It's also just the whole experience of being in a rock band and self-contained artists. When you really dig into their story, you realize that like everything that you go through, the entire arc of being in a band, they did it in a really extreme way. Like they had every argument you have in a band, trying to collaborate with others. Everything you think is unique to your stupid little garage band, the Beatles dealt with it in 1963.
Being kids, having the world spotlight, being a strange social phenomenon,
right?
Having schedules that were like completely slave labor, and then
they did it in such an extreme way. They went from like being in this little
combo
in a training ground to suddenly being these international focal point in such an extreme way. Like George Harrison would talk about how when they first came to America and had this huge success, it was only like a year after Kennedy had been assassinated, and they were constantly being invited to be in ticker tape parades. And he was just like, I'm not going to get assassinated in America. Are you crazy? And, and they were just like, working class kids from a suburb, not all that different than Hawthorne, California. And this was unprecedented, So they are a gateway on so many, and it continues like kids think that they're doing something unique. They're not, they're having the same experience that those guys had.
And I think also going back to the Hawthorne, since the Beach Boys are from Hawthorne.
Right. Yeah. That was the other fact that I saw. And I'm like, I thought there was something interesting about both those things
which had nothing to do with our experience. They were kind of like in the utopian version of Hawthorne.
Yeah, before the migration, and and all that stuff. So they were there during that era of when Hawthorne was at its heyday.
But they think about it though. If you think about like these, the reason the Beach Boys and the Beatles and even us, we were the wreckage of that kind of utopian idea. But the Beach Boys to come from this like. This mini kind of enclave of like what the world should be like for like white middle class America to all of a sudden jump onto the world stage and leave that behind. It's just the way the Beatles left Liverpool.
And look what it did to Brian Wilson.
Well,
yeah, there's some story about Brian Wilson like really having a mental break on tour. Yeah. And he's on the plane and he has a total break. And when they get back to LA, somebody has to drive him to the house in Hawthorne, which he had moved from a couple of years earlier. And he's like, he was just catatonic in the living room.
So we grew up near a huge...
wishing to be back into that safe cocoon.
I think we have this in common with the Wilson brothers. We grew up very close to a gas refinery. And very good in El Segundo, our sister city. And I think it's just the brain damage. Yeah, because we've all suffered a bit of like, being a bit mental.
Maybe.
Is there an EPA report about...
Well, I remember it's the which is standard. It used to be Standard Oil. I don't know what it is now.
I forget what it's one of the big ones.
But it's like about El Segundo is about it's like the next town over before the ocean, and there was a oil explosion at the refinery, and we lived a few miles east. And I remember our Volkswagen Bugs were just splattered with oil, so it blew up in the middle of the night. And then also there was. Very close was what's that company? Not Monsanto, but Dow Chemical, DuPont. The one that there was a chemical leak in India, and people and like 3,000 people died in their sleep. It was
in the 80s.
Yeah, that same chemical company was producing that same chemical
in El Segundo?
Like Manhattan Beach or Redondo Beach. So you never know. It's your environment. Who knows how our environments are affecting the way we see things? I mean, I've experimented with drugs, and I know it can change perception. I mean, temporarily, hopefully, but yeah, who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe that's why we became creative. I mean, that's why the Beach Boys and... and us exist.
Wait, how did your parents end up in Inglewood in the first place? And then Hawthorne, I guess, was part of the. You said migration. Is that white flight migration, or
Yeah,
is
I
it just
think so.
But I don't think
it's
it
part
was.
of it.
Yeah, but that was just the. They.
Well, I know how they ended up in Inglewood. My father.
They never made some like.
My father was from his family. My father was my
Military.
grandfather was a Navy guy. So my dad, he eventually settled in Palos Verdes, and was, I guess, kind of stationed out of San Pedro before he retired.
Yeah, Palos Verdes was like a brand new town. And my mom comes from Indiana, so she just came here when she was like 20 years old.
On her own.
Yeah, so I think, it just, I don't know, just kind of, you never know why people land where they land.
But I don't know where my dad...
I don't think it was a big political thing.
I don't know where my dad was I don't know what town, if he lived in...
He worked for United Airlines.
I don't know if my dad ever lived in Palos Verdes with his parents.
Yeah, he did.
He did?
Yes. He told me about seeing one of the nuclear bomb tests, because at Palos Verdes in the 50s, there was no street lights, so it was pitch black like it is in Malibu and sometime. And yes,
are you from Los Angeles? Do you know these areas?
I'm from I know, again, I know like San Pedro, that's where the Minutemen are from.
Yeah,
I know these like little bits and pieces.
Right.
I'm from the East Coast. I'm from Pennsylvania. Right?
Gotcha.
Right. So if you think of anything south of LAX is South Bay.
Okay.
And then you go east about 5 miles.
Well, Palos Verdes is that second set of hills when you look south. And because the first set of hills is Baldwin Hills, and then the second set is Palos Verdes. And on a clear day, the next set is Catalina Island. Mm-hmm. But
is Catalina Island considered South Bay?
No, but it's definitely considered Southern California. Yes, my father, I guess, eventually landed in Palos Verdes with his family, but then Jeff was saying like he worked at LAX. And
my mom
got a waitressing job near that area, and that's how they met. And then Inglewood just would have been an affordable place for a young couple to get a place, and that was relatively close to where they were both working.
Yeah, so it's not like they never did the. I mean, now where they live is,
but they lived in an apartment.
Live in Hawthorne, and Hawthorne now is like 90%. I'm not 80% African American, so they have no
that's hard
problem.
to say because Hawthorne's a huge. Hawthorne.
You can look at the statistics online.
Oh, have you looked at it?
Yeah. They always say like the racial breakdown, and they never left. So
Hawthorne's is just this big, large square that extends to El Segundo and Manhattan Beach on its western border. And then on the eastern border, it's like Watts, Compton, Lomita, Gardena. Those are all neighboring towns. It's really big. And we grew up on just off of
the western side.
Yeah, we grew up on the western side, just west of the 405, which was the considered like more of the still the Caucasian side from the 70s. But we were on Imperial. We were just the first street north of Imperial Highway. Which Imperial Highway is one of the main arteries that goes east and west in Los Angeles. It's name checked in I Love LA by Randy Newman, but it goes through Watts. It goes through the heart of Watts. It's only about 4 miles east of Hawthorne.
Oh, I thought Imperial Highway went all the way to Orange County.
Oh, I think it does. No, I think it goes probably to the Imperial Valley, even wherever that is. It goes really far. It's a highway, but
it probably turns into like some old folksy highway.
Yeah.
Like Route 66.
But anyways, yeah, I'm sorry. And then I keep trying to bring it back to this racial thing that you started with because I'm not really sure that we wrapped that up. But whatever, it's all good. I mean, I'm fascinated. I mean, this is like a thing that could go on forever. I'm interested in the history of Los Angeles and how these things have I'm interested in these topics and the history of LA.
Yeah. I mean, if you live here, we've lived here our entire lives. I'm 55 and I still don't know every crevice, and every book I've written about music that's based here, whether it's, jazz, the jazz of what was the
Central
Avenue to rock and roll and 60s psychedelic punk history. I see it through the eyes of that kind of musical lens, but and film, but I don't know the whole city as much as I.
Well, I
do know more than most because I care. But
I love Waze because Waze really the navigation app, because it will take me through neighborhoods I never go through.
So I love to go through neighborhoods I've never gone through.
I love that too. I find it's like interesting to discover areas that have, maybe a change in the grid or something, and then you'll find an old movie theater you never knew about that's now turned into something else. But like, just these little remnants, these landmarks of other eras, it just makes it feel more palpable that the history of the city.
Well, and, popular culture being whether it's from the Los Angeles of the 40s or now, it all makes its way into the creative mind.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean I think that is a really interesting, and I think that's why so many people are focused on the history of Los Angeles, because this is where so much culture has been created.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, well, how's the history and the geography of this place? I think I am there's a Marxist geographer named David Harvey, and he talks. His whole thing is about like, how does the shape of the place that you and the distribution of resources and all that kind of stuff, how does that shape the culture and the place that you're from? Right. That's why I ask a lot of things about like where you're from. Hawthorne specifically, like how did the shape, even just like the basic geography. I think of dumb things. This is not a geography thing, but I think of something like, I'm kind of short, and I was like very short in grade school. How did just that basic kind of like my physical shape push me away from everyone else? Because I couldn't, I definitely like wasn't good at sports because I was so small. So that pushed me away from that into weirder things in some way. And that was literally like, I had no choice. That's a genetic thing.
Yeah. So things that we inherit, how does that, it could be the geography that you were born into or the body. Like, how does that affect the bigger picture of life or bigger picture culture?
I don't ever think there's any set answer to that, though.
What's that?
You never. I mean, like, you never.
No, I could have been angry. I could have turned into like a Napoleon type.
I think of Keith Morris, the singer of Off, another band I'm in, and he's got a very George Costanza kind of attitude. And we always like to call him the George Costanza of punk. And I think that has something to do with him getting picked on for being small, an easy target when he's a kid.
He's a real loud mouth. I mean, he's not a loud mouth personally, but when he performs, he's very extroverted and very loud.
Well, because that's what George Costanza, that's why I mentioned George, because it's all about issuing gripes with things. And, I'm kind of taking the piss or whatever, but with Keith, I mean, he's a great voice of discontent, but it's funny to call him George Costanza, but because I actually take him much more seriously than that. But I do believe that his size had something to do with his stance, his emotional point of view.
But it's also like, when you're being here in Los Angeles, like movies, everything. There's even weirder ways to view this lens, because I've noticed that, so I would think about movies like Gone with the Wind or films that were filmed in Culver City, which is another town that's near the ocean, near our house. It has the same outdoor lighting that we grew up with, and it's like
kind of brackish
you
air,
can see all this
breeze.
Like, wow, that's just like that's South Bay lighting in 1930s Culver and MGM. Then you'll see like a 70s thing filmed in
lighting,
the valley.
You mean the way the light is filtered through the air in that particular climate?
Yeah, I mean because you have a total lens, different lens being on the south side of Los Angeles than you do like in the valley.
Yeah,
and so you see something like Columbo shot on 1970s, shot on Universal, and you see like the foliage, and you see the way the light is. It's always 10 degrees hotter in the valley. You can see that. So that's like other people who don't grow up here, who don't care, and a lot of people grew up here and don't care. They don't see things like that. So we get a look into the other side, the other side of the plastic globe, pop culture.
When you guys were growing up, what was your household like? It's just you and your parents.
This is four of us. Like we're the only siblings, and we grew up in a pretty small house. We're talking about those track houses that were built in the 40s,
like Levittown type stuff, where it's like all the same, everything's the same.
There's like there's 2 or 3 different designs.
The layouts.
By the time that we got there, people were customizing houses, and there was no it wasn't like a closed area where you had to you can make it anything you want.
You could paint your house any color you wanted. You could build a second story.
And it's part of it is still there, and it's very well kept. But you just still see like, wow, I can still retrace my paper route of like, of when I was a little kid, and it's like I can almost remember the houses that actually were customers. It's very strange.
But the actual where we were, the actual blocks where we were, it was pretty gritty. Actually, we were just like I said earlier, we're one block south of Imperial Highway, which was a main artery coming off of LAX, and there were strip bars there. And we were like a stone's throw from the furthermost south runway of LAX. So we're really close to the airport. And
the 747s every night, our whole house would shake.
Around dinner time, the house would shake because there'd be like lots of planes taking off on that runway around 5 or 6. But so there was lots of prostitution in our neighborhood, lots of which you don't really see,
like classic Beretta type, like 70s TV show hookers.
I guess that's one thing that's really changed. The internet's really changed a lot. You don't really see so much street action in sex work anymore. At least I don't.
These girls, like, we would just watch them in awe because they had that like platform shoes.
Well, they all look like they were in Find the Family Stone. Yeah. I mean, they were dressed like rock
the coolest
stars.
Looking people in our neighborhood.
I mean, there was one girl that I've never lost this image. African American girl, huge afro. She had a brown, like a Girl Scout cap pinned on her head, which is kind of really creepy when you think about it, like, fetishizing little kids. But
just that was for fashion.
But she was all woman. I mean, she was this, but I remember, wearing like a very sexual, it was like a sort of like a Britney Spears kind of fantasy, but then you do it with like platform shoes. She kind of looked like somewhere between Britney Spears and Kiss,
And then the New York Dolls, first album.
Yeah, and I remember it, and it just was, and these images really stuck in my head.
And we would go, there would be a lot of vacant houses. You forgot to mention the 105 freeway cuts directly over our block where we used to live. So there was a lot of vacant houses for 10 years until they can figure out the route they were going to settle on. And a lot of the hookers in our neighborhood, they would bust into the vacant houses. We would bust into them on the way home from school for fun. But they'd go there to get high and maybe bring tricks there or whatever. But I remember going in there one time and there was like platform shoes on the ground, empty wine bottles, empty glue bottles,
like modeling glue, like tubes,
like in the Ramones used to sniff in the 60s and 70s. They had chemicals that would make you high but rot your brain. So they would sniff glue, drink cheap wine, change their clothes, and then I swear there were candles and a pentagram on the floor. So we had satanic hookers in our neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's so close to where you said the aerospace industry is over.
Well, yeah,
there, right?
it's airport.
I also think there's a lot of businessmen like coming in for the weekend, kind of thing.
People,
too.
It's airport traffic because there would be a strip club.
Sure, yeah, but
the Wild Goose.
But there's the Jack Parsons. Do you know about Jack? Is it Jack Parsons Whitehead? Jack Whitehead Parsons, he's the aerospace engineer. He helped create modern rocketry,
right.
But also he was part of like a kind of like a cult.
Is that the L. Ron Hubbard?
Yes, that was
There's also JPL.
Yeah.
Those guys were all like
Jet Propulsion Lab,
and they were into
and Kenneth Anger was
and stuff
buddies
like that.
with those people too.
Yeah. Now I don't know if that guy had anything to do with like this ring of prostitution, I think these satanic prostitutes in our neighborhood. Maybe,
but the Ramones sang about it because I remember like being a kid, like the older teens who were building models were really big. Revell models were big in the late 60s, early 70s. I was a little kid, but our neighbors who were a little bit older, teenagers, sniffing modeling glue was a big thing, and people would put it in bags and huff it, just like the Ramones would sing about it because they're about that same age. But I think they had sensed, like somewhere in the 70s, they took that chemical out. That was, people can still get
fun
it.
Chemical.
And then models kind of went away. It's like after the late 60s with all the Big Daddy Roth model, everything that was really big, it kind of disappeared.
So no one was actually into the model. They're just
maybe
into the
that
glue.
chemical, just helped the pieces to stick better. But I also think the teens who were getting high off of it lost interest in building models, building battleships and hot rods.
That's a good point.
So you're growing up surrounded by oil explosions,
hookers,
satanic prostitutes, abandoned homes,
and then the threat of a freeway coming to take our home, which it eventually did. Like the house that we grew up in is now under a pylon for the 105.
It's the album. I mean, it's the house that we formed our band, wrote our first album, first songs, and it is a pylon now.
Like eminent domain, they just took it away, or
well, see, that's what we were saying about our neighborhood. There was a squared off few blocks of our neighborhood that the 105 was going to be on 118th Street and cut across, and then so they took all those houses out, and then they would change the route like 3 years later. So we just had all these vacant houses, but they settled on our street.
Yeah, they decimated entire neighborhoods in the process.
But it took them like 10 years to get to our street.
The best document of the way the neighborhood was when we were growing up is in the film Suburbia, which I've never actually seen. I've just seen clips of it, but
Penelope Sphere's
Penelope Sphere's film about punk rockers in suburban Southern California. It's not a documentary. It's an actual fictional story, but a lot of it's filmed along that same route. Where the same houses were the same tracks of houses, although it wasn't Hawthorne there. Theirs is further east, but it was still along the 105. And so you get the sense of exactly what our neighborhood looked like.
Yeah, it's strange growing up, like the street, this once nice street, there would be like 4 vacant houses on it. And then there would be entire streets that were just vacant lots, which as a kid was incredibly fun.
Yeah.
I mean, we would break into houses, and there's always that kid who's always kind of a pyro who like accidentally burns down one of the vacant houses.
I remember
we could ride dirt bikes.
I remember one time I remember walking home from school every day, and there was this like really sick smell. Like, oh, what is that? It got worse and worse until finally we went and explored, and inside of a vacant house was a rotting like 4-foot shark.
What?
Yeah,
it smelled. I mean, it would walking home from school be like, oh my God, everyone would plug their nose, and it smelled like a fertilizer factory had exploded.
But at some point
it was that pungent.
Yeah, it was at some point it hit like what do they call that? It was really, really bad where you had to go check it out, and someone had like broken into this garage of this vacant house, and in there was a shark probably a little bit smaller than me. And it had been gutted, and because someone must have caught it.
Well, some people fished. We lived in a fishing community. Like people would go fishing.
Well, Hawthorne's only a couple miles inland from the beach.
But why the person brought the shark and dumped it?
They probably didn't
like
want
a hit. It was like
they probably just wanted the Jaws.
Yeah, because
as some kind of
that was post Jaws. Yeah, and that was people were killing sharks just for the Jaws and like some. But it smelled really bad.
Yeah. Remember, it hit critical mass.
Yeah.
The odor hit critical mass, and someone had to break down that door and figure it out.
Yeah,
someone must have an adult probably thought there was going to be a dead body.
Someone went fishing and just thought, I'll do this and just dump it in. They didn't know how to dispose of the body.
But there's all sorts of weird things like that to discover.
But it was mostly innocent.
And also Jeff and I both had paper routes in our growing up, and so like for me. I remember I would have my paper route. I had a lot of papers.
I was Herald Examiner, the late great Herald Examiners, and no one in our neighborhood would subscribe. So my paper route was like 30 very thin papers.
Did it have something to do with the unions or something?
Yeah, there was some like
people were really annoyed with you when you would try to get subscriptions.
Yeah, so I never knew what the political problem was in our neighborhood, but yeah, it wasn't as popular as the Daily Breeze, which still exists to this day.
So
South Bay paper.
I had a Daily Breeze route that I had inherited from a local kid that had done a really great job. I kind of destroyed the route and lost most of my customers, but I was playing shows by that time, but and way too hungover to get up for the Sunday paper, although I would do it. But
although you were 12,
and it's so sad. But the other thing I was going to mention, the fun fact, was just that. There would be, like one oddball house in a block that was otherwise just like vacant houses, and you'd have to drive all the way down for that one house that subscribed. And then often you would see prostitutes in cars with Johns. And, I just remember seeing, girls getting out of the car, pulling up their panties, like, hi, honey, and looking at me and like being really sweet. But it was just like, that was my introduction to
Adult sexuality.
Adult sexuality on a lot of levels, yeah.
The wild goose and the off ramp.
Yeah, we remember the time we stuck bottle rockets.
Shot it into the.
Yeah, we were aiming bottle rocket. We found this little window in the back of the strip club where you could see the dancers. So we might have like taken turns standing on a box watching, and then eventually just got bored and decided to shoot bottle rockets at the stage.
Into the club.
Like Porky's or something.
Yeah,
like
because there were pimps, like old 1970s style pimps there who drove Rolls Royces and just crazy stuff.
Yeah.
It was so normal for us.
Host liquor, where all these dudes would like cash their checks on Fridays and drink Brew 102.
And club canned cocktails.
Club canned cocktail. And I remember they sold these gigantic pickle jar on the counter of the liquor store, and they were selling pickled pig's feet, which is, I guess, a southern treat.
And pickled eggs. But the liquor stores, for some reason, they had a porno section, but they would, the one liquor store would actually stock like Rock Scene magazine, early Cream magazine, all that stuff that no one but us were buying. So thank God for them. I don't know who their distributors
were. That was Lindy Liquor.
Yeah. No, not Lindy Liquor.
Lindy on Felton.
No, the one that was on Imperial.
Yeah, it was not Lindy.
No, Lindy's still there.
The one that was on Felton and Imperial is what I'm thinking of.
No, that's the one.
Yeah, Felton and Imperial.
That one's
closer towards aviation.
Yeah, I was talking about the one actually on Imperial.
Yeah, whatever.
Were you guys okay? So what I'm getting a picture of is that it's a weird place. I've had some, like Chris Carter from the X-Files is from, I forget where, somewhere over where you guys are, where they were going to put the 105 in, but they never did. So there were just like huge blocks of abandoned homes.
Oh yeah,
and like there's something about like these towns kind of like would you say it's south of LAX?
Yeah,
what's it called? South Bay. Where like it's strange for a lot of different reasons. It's just strange.
Yeah, very strange.
Were you keyed into the strangeness when you were growing up, or was it just like, oh, this is normal, I regard this as normal, and only in retrospect have you like, oh yeah, that was really weird?
No, we knew it was weird because we had friends who lived in neighborhoods that weren't like ours, but it was also a fun playground for a kid. But it was very strange, and you always...
You're talking about the specific neighborhoods where they're being decimated by the freeway?
Yeah.
Not just that, but just like also like...
blocks of vacant houses, like what we were talking about. Yeah, I mean...
I mean, the rest of South Bay is kind of affluent, and and like if you go further into South Bay, like the neighborhood we lived in was more like blue collar. The kids in our neighborhood would typically, their parents would typically work in the factories at the aerospace in the aerospace industries, and then you'd go further to like places like Manhattan Beach, the fancier, nicer areas, and those parents were all engineers at those companies, and they had the white collar jobs, and so. I mean, I don't know. That's all that we knew. I mean, the thing that was weirder to me is when you go to a kid's house that had like an upstairs, and had lots of space, and everyone had their own bedroom, and more of a Brady Bunch kind of existence. That was weirder to me, actually. But I don't know. I mean, I don't really know that South Bay was all that. If you're talking about the bigger South Bay, I mean, I think it was really weird that the music that came out of it, that was odd.
I think it's just because it's such a mixed bag. It's just like it's a section of Southern California that is just a complete bizarre. Being close to the ocean, and then also, having the industrial areas, everything is just kind of there. And
then there's also maybe, I wonder if the things like San Pedro and having...
San Pedro is the Liverpool of...
Right, being like the Liverpool, like having the Navy and the Merchant Marines, I guess, and
who knows?
I don't know if they had an effect. I have no idea. I'm not book smart enough to know these things.
Do you think it had an effect on you, or specifically, what was the effect?
Oh, it had an effect. It was because you knew it was just bizarre, and you had to entertain yourself with weirdness. You just play with what you have.
Well, we were just very lucky.
We didn't think it was normal that we never thought our existence and where we lived was like a typical normal type environment. We had a television. We saw what normal was supposed to look like.
Yeah. Well, what
But
do
it
you
was fun.
mean? I don't know. I thought it was normal then. Like going to the beach every day. Going to the beach every day.
I mean, in that environment that's just, like, living in an area with just all these vacant houses.
Well, the
all
vacant
this
house
weird-
part, that's
and like you said, refineries here. Then you live near the ocean, and then I mean, it's just it was normal to us, but it was a very abnormal. It wasn't like what was considered like the American concept of what normal was, like Brady Bunch or something.
But you're conscious. But I think what's interesting is you're conscious of it.
Yeah,
as
I
kids,
was. Yeah.
Where I don't think I think on some level I knew I was weird, but I don't think I was like.
What town in Pennsylvania are you from?
Reading, Pennsylvania, which I think is about the same size as Hawthorne.
Okay, and then is this a suburb of another city?
No. I mean, I grew up in the suburbs
Of Reading. And then and Reading is known for. I feel like there was
outlets, pretzels. White power groups at some point up through the 70s. They used to have, my dad told me that they would have, like the Klan would march every week up through I forget, like the mid 70s. So
I feel like
wow.
I feel like I always saw it as reading. It's READ, right? It's READ, and I think that's like it was.
What was the
we used to mail away for something like on the back of a
wow, your memory
of a cereal box. Or something in Reading, Pennsylvania. I can't remember what it was.
Well, you've been all over we've been all over the country millions of times, so we've passed through Reading.
Well, so where is Reading in comparison to? Is it central Pennsylvania?
No, it's about halfway between Philly and Harrisburg. So
is Harrisburg central?
Harrisburg is is kind of like the middle of the state, roughly. But it's, I don't know. It's kind of like I'm getting the same feeling that like. We had to make our own fun. It was kind of a boring place. And my friends and I, stealing signs or putting dry ice in bottles of soda, like emptying out bottles of soda, putting dry ice in there with some water, and then throwing it and it explodes. Like dumb things like that, because there's nothing else to do. It's very boring, and you have to make your own fun.
That's the way it was for us. Even though we were very close to the center of all action, Hollywood, California, we were, as kids, it was the same thing.
We might as well have been in Reading because,
we were stuck there until we got wheels.
I mean, the public transport, as you know, is still barely functional.
It's like to be a kid wanting to go to Hollywood and Hawthorne. It's like crossing the Oregon Trail.
But Jeff got a moped when he was 15, and he used to ride his moped over the
so from near LAX
over the Cahuenga Pass, which is not the Cahuenga Pass, but the La Cienega Pass.
Yeah, which was like being on a freeway with a 40cc moped. It was horrifying.
He would ride his moped to go to the record shop in Westwood Village, which was
Rhino
15
Records.
miles away. But I guess that was at least a possibility, just with death-defying. I don't know if in Reading if you had that option.
No, there was a couple no. When my friend, an older friend of ours learned how to drive, then the world opened up to us. We could go to the record store. We could go to Blockbuster.
Right. I know. It's insane.
But what were your parents like? Were they both worked?
Yeah.
Were they
still do by choice, but they're in their 80s.
My mom's not yet.
Not quite, but our dad's in his 80s. And they're just have their own business. My dad is a precision welder, and he's had his own business since we were kids. My mom kind of helps him run it, and they go to work every day, 5 days a week. And they want to retire. They can retire financially, but it's like they've worked for so many years that they're just into it, or kind of not getting so into it anymore.
But they weren't artists. I mean, on the topic of beginnings and how we ended up doing what we're doing, they had little to do with it other than the fact that they didn't discourage it.
Yeah, and then they liked music. We'd blast music to get ready for school and stuff, and our dad would be into it. They just, for us, when we started being a garage band, they let us play in the garage, but we tried to be done before our dad got home from work, and rightfully so. I mean, We lived in a very small house, and I'm sure after working 8 hours,
He didn't want to hear us
he didn't want to
bashing
hear
around.
us bashing around.
But he had so he had a reel-to-reel tape player, and he had a small collection of he had Sgt. Pepper's on reel-to-reel, didn't he? I think.
I don't remember, but I remember.
I remember he had a Donovan record. He had an early Cat Stevens record, and he had a light interest in music.
Yeah, they kind of normal parental.
But he's the oldest of 8, and so his youngest siblings were more like older siblings to us than aunts and uncles. And one of them was like a screaming Beatles fanatic, and so that aunt took Jeff to see the Beatles at Padre Stadium in 1966 when he was 3 years old. What's that?
So I was a tot.
When you were 3,
Yeah.
taught. Yeah. So he was, so those kinds of things affected us.
Yeah.
My uncle Shane, who's only 9 years older than Jeff, I think, and 20 years younger than my dad, gave Jeff and I a copy of Ziggy Stardust on 8-track. One Christmas, it was just around, and and he saw that we were interested in it, so he just lent it to us. But then by the next Christmas, I don't think we ever gave him that 8-track back.
Because we turned our best friend onto it, and we would listen to it in their home console till her mother got home from school.
Yeah.
So we would just play it over and over. And then her mother would come from school, okay, enough of this. And she'd play Charlie Pride's Behind Closed Doors record.
And John Snesser would play Charlie Pride. I remember she was also into Rita Coolidge. But then I remember the progression of that. That same Uncle Shane. So I would have been like 6 or something. The next Christmas, he gave me, like, went out and bought as a gift Lou Reed's Rock and Roll Animal, the live album. He gave that to me the year it came out, like 1973 or something. I would have been 6 years old. Which has the titles Heroin, Sweet Jane.
I figured you would like it. Or maybe he just gave it to you. Maybe he'd...
It's a great record, man. I'm grateful. I'm very grateful.
That is kind of not such a great record.
Okay, well, whatever. I mean, he introduced me to a great song
great
catalog.
artist. Yeah, definitely.
He introduced me to a great song catalog. So that it opened the door. Only like, God, it was only like 7 years later.
But if you're 6, it's like 5 years later, you would be playing bass in a rock and roll band.
Sure, and only about 6 or 7 years later, I'm being exposed to the first Velvet Underground album, and I have a point of reference for the lead singer at this point because I'd had early Lou Reed records or later Lou Reed records.
What I'm thinking of is like you start playing music very early in your lives, like 15 and 11, something like that, 14 and 11, right? And I'm wondering, like, I mean, again, I have like an hour's worth of information that I'm drawing on, and so this is a little like armchairy. But like I see you like growing up in a world where like the adult world is kind of impinging on you. Like there's prostitutes everywhere. There's like I don't know about everywhere, but you know what I mean. You're getting music that probably like that stuff happened to me later in my teens, and a lot of it because of like the internet.
Right. Yeah.
Right. I started to find out about weirder music.
Yeah.
We had my best friend's older brother was in college, and he would funnel us some things, but I was already like 14, 15, by then. I'm wondering if there's like any kind of, again, this is just armchair bullshit, but like, is there anything to that idea that the adult world was already pushing in on your lives?
Well, sure. I mean, we had to find our own playground within that jungle. I mean, yes. And, in order to find our interests, like, to play music, we didn't have internet, but like I said, we found like weird rock and roll magazines that were not mainstream. So that's how we discovered stuff. So I don't think it wasn't like the jungle was closing in on us. It's just, we just kind of found a space that we just excelled at. Playing music and I can't really, looking back, it's hard to comment like on how anything affected anything. I mean, it's just, I don't know. How do you put your experience into like,
well, I mean, I think of that. I do when I think about that time. I think of it as gritty. That's the term I use, and that was just our experience. I do think that, it was, I mean, nowadays kids, that, you know, I'm worried my kid's going to see pornography way too soon, you know? And I think that I was moving at more of a sort of modern day kid's pace. And it made me different than my peers, for sure. So it had an effect, for sure. You know, I mean, like the fact that I was in a punk band by the time I was in 7th grade, at a time when it was a totally foreign concept.
You were playing shows with, adult shows, having song on the radio, then go back to grammar school or 7th grade.
Yeah, I mean, I had to deal with the fact that like I became a complete outcast with my peer group, but I was accepted by a much older group and outside of active social life at such a young age. So I mean, I don't even know if it is comparable to. I don't know if it's normal in any era, but I do know that I was exposed to things earlier than I want my kid to.
Yeah,
be
we were like
exposed to
child
things.
stars without stage parents.
Yeah.
we were
In a
like
weird sort of way.
rudderless Osmond.
Yeah.
And we were just kind of doing it ourselves. But yeah, we were exposed to a lot of the same things that kids in show business. But since we were self-propelled ourselves into that world.
Yeah, which is the way it should be. I think.
Yeah, it would have been cool to have we did find mentors and people to kind of look out after us.
I mean, it's funny though, like to think of because now I still play music with Keith Morris, who I've known since that time, and Keith once took Jeff and I to Hollywood because Hawthorne was north of where everyone lived, and it was in between Hollywood and the rest of the South Bay. And I remember Keith picked up who everyone called at the time the Kiddies.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot that.
He came and picked up the Kiddies on his way to Hollywood, and I remember it was this death-defying drive. It was the first time I'd ever been on Dead Man's Curve, which is a part of Sunset where it's really
home
windy.
At a certain time, and Keith was had no curfew.
Well, Keith, of course, had no guy. He was in his mid-20s. It was like he was probably on a bunch of the devil's dandruff and drinking whatever he get his hands on, and and my parents. They didn't know. They were like, oh, they let us. We were just very persistent.
They were like, oh, Keith. My dad was like, oh, Keith's dad owns a fishing shop because my dad was also into fishing, so Keith was fine. But he was.
But I mean, yes, I guess Keith could have been considered for a night a mentor. But what that mentor ended up doing was he took us out, and then we were just out till the sun came
We went
up.
to a show, but then it was like the after party.
But then he kept after party hopping. And then the one thing I will say is that actually was very responsible of him, but I didn't realize at the time was he insisted on going to the IHOP on Sunset over by Hollywood High, at 3 a.m. He's then going to go there. And I remember the sun coming up while we were there and just shitting my pants because I guess technically we could have gone used the payphone and called our parents, but it was always back then in those days, pre-texting, the big debate was, do I call and wake them up?
No, you don't. No, I mean,
well, hang on, let me explain what the dilemma is before you say no. So the dilemma is there's a possibility they're asleep. There's also a very strong possibility that they're awake. But if they're awake, they're fuming. So you probably should call to at least let them know you're not dead. But if you call and they're asleep, then you woke them up. And then that's a whole other thing. So you had to weigh that one out. And we chose not to call them because I remember
you still had your paper route.
Oh yeah, I would have had to.
The Sunday paper is waiting for you with the dawn.
Yeah, that too. So that was
one
kind
of many stories.
So that's the kind of mentoring we got was Keith Morris doing things like that. But it's funny. I like to talk about that still to him. But at any rate,
guys, thank you so much for coming over and talking. Yeah, thank you.
We gave you just a slice.
And we'll see you guys
this
next
is
time.
about beginning, so I'm glad that we just
I think that's it. Look, the minute we start talking about the actual career stuff, then I start to get bored. I'm like, and you've already probably told the stories a million times already.
Sure.
Anyway, so.
The only thing I'd add is that I just did this mammoth, this epic post on my Instagram today about a new Red Kross song that is up for streaming today called "The Party Underground," and and it's from our forthcoming album.
Which is great, by the way.
Thank you. Our forthcoming album, Beyond the Door. But the song, Party Underground, is sort of like this celebration of underground music, underground culture, which I like to talk about is
Underground politics.
Or underground, whatever. But I personally have like really inhabited the world of underground music since I was a child, and I've loved it as a fan as well. So that's also a relevant part of your beginning story, maybe, and maybe people want to check out the Party Underground.
Yeah, please do. And we'll see you guys next time.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Oh, bye. Oh, bye. Oh, bye. Oh, bye. Oh, bye. Oh, bye.